We know as Canadians, our costs go up over the holidays and into the winter months. As a House of Commons, as members of Parliament, we now have an opportunity to come together to provide much needed relief and support to people right across this country.
In just over 2 weeks, Canadians could see a bit of a break at the checkout counters. Tonight, the House of Commons will vote on whether to pass the Liberal government's proposed GST holiday, due to run from December 14th to February 15th. The Conservatives are voting against it.
He's desperate. He's lost control, but he's trying to hold on to power. And so he's come up with a irresponsible and inflationist $6 billion tax trick that he will take away right before raising the carbon tax on heat, housing, groceries, and gas in just a few months.
The Bloc Québécois also plans to vote against this bill, but it is expected to pass with support from the NDP. Meanwhile, legislation containing that proposed $250 rebate check will come later, as the NDP presses the Liberals to expand that support to include more people. The Power Panel is back on this with Michelle Cadario, James Moore, Andrew Thompson, and Shachi Kurl. Andrew, as a former finance minister, I have to ask you about this GST holiday break. There's a couple of things that confuse me. The exemptions. Children's toys qualify if they are intended for children under 14 years old. So 15-year-olds are out. I've never seen a toy, I'm a dad, with a maximum age other than Lego, which is 99. But on the kids' clothing side of it, you can buy sports clothing and dance wear, but soccer cleats, skates, tap shoes, they're out. But a PlayStation 5 would be in. The administrative challenge of this for retailers seems to me like it will be just enormous.
So this has always been one of the problems with the GST. It came in and it just said, we're taxing everything. And this was such a departure from what used to be in place. Provinces generally had fairly narrow sales tax bases. The federal government came in, steamrolled over all of that when Mulroney was in, and put it on everything. And I think what you're seeing now, at least from the federal NDP, calling for a reestablishment of a tax base that's more reasonable and more family friendly, and frankly looks a lot more like what's in in Saskatchewan, or of course Alberta has no sales tax whatsoever. So, figuring out how to make this simpler would certainly be good. I think that is one of the problems that the Liberals have, is that they've introduced this really narrow window, and it's a bit of an odd timed one. It doesn't catch much time before Christmas, drags on into February for some weird reason, maybe to get Valentine's Day, I don't know. But it doesn't make a lot of sense for the pause. They would be better actually coming forward, doing a serious review of what the NDP's proposed, figure out what items to take off that are going to actually help help Canadian families deal with the very real pressures that are on there.
Yeah, Shachi, though, it just seems bizarre to me that this is meant to be something for Christmas. You can't buy your kid a pair of soccer cleats or skates. I mean, these are the sorts of things you want to give, like active kids, dance shoes, tap shoes. I don't know necessarily why all of these things are being excluded, but it's going to be very complicated, because things you think you'll get a break on, you're just not going to get the break on.
So come December 14th, cue the stories about angry shoppers saying, I wanted to buy Johnny some soccer cleats, and I wanted to buy Janie some soccer cleats too, and there's tax on it, and this isn't what was as promised, and I blame those Liberals. I mean, these are the challenges that come with when you try to do one-off, carve-out type of temporary relief. Now, I said last week, this is something that could actually help the Liberals politically, but there are other implications here too, right? How much does it cost? And we just finished coming out of a segment talking about some massively big ticket items, defense spending, border security, where at what point, where does the money all come from for all of this? The government is not only yielding tax income with this holiday, it's also doing that with the $250 checks, which, if the NDP has its way, not unreasonably so, would go to more people than fewer. So there's a lot of dynamics here. I think that's what we're trying to talk about. And of course, I'm always left asking, how much salience is there with Canadians? How many will actually notice it? How many at the end of the day noticing it, if they look at a restaurant check, or if they go shopping and see, will feel like that they've saved a lot, or this has been a genuine helper? It may well, because we know that Canadians are continuing to feel very cost pressured. Right. On the other hand, they might say, look, we didn't save all that much. What was it all for? Meh, thank you very much. I'm not sure that it moves any votes, but I don't want to prejudge what Canadians are going to tell me on that subject.
Well, yeah, I mean, Michelle, it's the checks as currently designed, and the GST holiday is about $6.5 billion. You broaden out the checks based on what everyone else wants, you might add another $1.5 billion to $2.5 billion to it. So suddenly you get up to $8.5 billion. You're getting up to the cost of like the child care program for sort of a one-off support package. I mean, what do you make of this and the way it's playing out in the Parliament right now?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that the NDP is doing anybody any favors. Working Canadians felt that, that it was targeted. It's a targeted program for them. And, it's a segment of the population that hasn't actually had much targeting whatsoever. That's not denying that other people aren't hurting and that don't need some financial help. I can see that. But this is a targeted program for a targeted segment of society. And because it's a one-off, it kind of stands out even more. So I'm not sure that those people who are accepting or wanting their $250 checks are going to be that super excited that the NDP is holding that up. On the GST thing and all of those cutouts, I think it's just ridiculous. I think that it's going to be unbelievably confusing, both for the consumer and for every poor person who has to actually program those their cash machines. And you can't make something harder and more difficult when it's supposed to be something easy that people can remember, that it's a GST holiday for what you're getting your kids for Christmas. Like, just keep it simple. Well,
there's children's footwear with an insole length of 24.25 centimeters or less will qualify for it. But if you have a kid with big feet, James, you got to buy adult clothing or footwear. Even if it's purchased for a child, it won't qualify. I have some friends. My kids are under 10, so they're not there yet. But they're big kids, and you can't get them the skates, and you can't get them the sneakers. It's going to be very confusing.
Well, here's my TMI moment. When I was 13 years old, I had a size 13 shoe. So I guess I wouldn't have new shoes. But yeah, look, people wonder sometimes, why is it that the federal bureaucracy grew 40% under Justin Trudeau in the last 8 years? This is why, because you have people beavering away trying to write these rules in order to apply a tax that at the end of the day is only going to annoy everybody. So, I mean, I think it's gimmicky. I think it's bad public policy. And by the way, $6 billion is not a small amount of money. We've had many conversations on this show and a lot across the country about how do we get to 2% of GDP for defense spending. $6 billion annualized. $6 billion is about 10% of the gap that's necessary for new spending in order to get to 2% of GDP for defense spending. And they're just throwing it out the window here on a one-time giveaway going into the Christmas season to try to get some good feelings for Prime Minister Trudeau as he decides whether or not to run for re-election over the Christmas break. I mean, it's pretty poor statesmanship.
Yeah, like dolls, plush toys, and soft toys qualify, but collectibles, such as collectible dolls, do not qualify. So I don't know how you tell the difference, but Andrew, here we are, and now this is being sort of negotiated in the foyer outside the House of Commons in the West Bloc in various scrums going into question period, this and the check and the parameters of that. It seems like, I wasn't here for the last minority government, but this seems like a very fraught way to be developing fiscal and tax policy.
Well, it's a bit rushed, but I mean, we're also ignoring the fact this is coming off of ready-to-eat meals, which a lot of Canadians depend on. It's coming off a lot of groceries. It's coming off of a large number of, it's coming off your utility bills. I mean, this
it's not. It's not coming off utility bills. It's staying on that. It's staying on that. So it's sort of like hardcore essentials. It's coming off wine and coolers and things, but not off hardcore essentials like that.
Yeah. So this is part of the problem of not having, I think, really kind of thought through entirely where it's at. To the question about the cost of it, though, and even on the checks, I mean, there's not a finance minister in the country that, when they get extra money, hasn't looked at the option of just sending out more checks. I mean, it's one of the ways that you just think about how do you redistribute the found wealth. In this case, we're not finding the wealth. We're trying to figure out how to take pressures off of people. But people aren't asking these same questions in Ontario, where we're about to get $250 checks, and nobody's asking this question in other provinces where gas taxes have come off. I mean, this seems to be a very peculiar and partisan fight being picked with the Liberals, and to an extent with the NDP, about where the money comes from. We don't ask that of anybody else on these pieces. This is obviously intentioned to try to remove pressures on Canadians who are feeling a lot of inflation right now. It seems like a reasonable measure. Whether it's going to be well executed or not, I have no idea. It doesn't sound great, but it is well-intentioned, and I think what the government should do after February 1 is take a serious look at what the NDP's proposed in terms of really removing this off of essentials and think about how to budget that in.
It's interesting, though, Shachi, Andrew hits on something there. I mean, Doug Ford is giving out a $200 check to everybody. There's no means testing. There's no $150,000 cap in Ontario. And it's not a $40+ billion deficit, but it's a big deficit in Ontario, big deficit in Quebec, big deficit in BC. Why do you think, is it just because Justin Trudeau is struggling in the polls and Doug Ford is not, that Justin Trudeau gets attacked for this while the Premier of Ontario, who's got healthcare challenges that are quite large, gets to sort of walk away from it?
Well, there's a little bit of that, you think?
Yeah.
It might have something to do with it. I think it also has to do with the fact that Canadians, going back even 18 months ago, 2 years ago, were crying out for relief. And we went through a long conversation this time a year ago around the way carbon pricing is structured and the way Canadians at the time perceived that they either weren't getting a rebate or that the rebate they were receiving was less than what they were paying out. What might have been more effective for the Liberal government in that moment was to say, look, we're not going to go ahead with increases for some time. We're going to freeze it. Maybe we're going to reduce it. Maybe we're going to give it. But ideologically, that pricing, that tax has been such a marquee part of the Liberal government's legacy, who they are, how they've wanted to frame themselves over the last decade, that they just could not bring themselves to do it. So this is where, people are asking for one thing and you say, well, I'm not going to give you that. You can kind of have this instead. And I think this is very much how it was conceived. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the haphazard way in which it was conceived. We've got to give Canadians something. They need something. It's not unreasonable to give them something, but we can't give them the thing that they were asking for to begin with. So now we're going to try this for 2 months. We'll see.
Michelle, do you think they get a lift from it? And do you think they're being held to a double standard compared to premiers who were sending out stimulus checks when inflation was at like 7%, for example?
Well, yeah, and I think Premier Eby has something on the table for $1,000 a person or something like that. So, yeah, and it happens when you're low in the polls and you look vulnerable, and it's easy to kind of pick on a party at that point. But I think this will be well received. Will it turn everything around? No. But isn't it acknowledgement of what is actually top of mind for Canadians? Yes, it is. And so could it be a good start in terms of putting together a policy platform and policy proposal and a budget that actually speaks more to those needs than to perhaps how Canadians have been feeling that their priorities haven't been actually reflected in what the government's been putting forward.
James, the Conservatives came out against it all today, and they're being, the attack coming back is that, look, you're the party of tax, X the tax is against Xing this tax and giving a holiday to people. Is there an inconsistency there, or do you buy Mr. Poilievre's argument that this is just a gimmick and it's not a meaningful tax reform?
Well, so that's what I was thinking the other day, that Liberals, when they're voting in favor of this, they might want to buy, 170 Conservative T-shirts that say "Axe the Tax" and wear them during the vote in Parliament. I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but I suppose there's a thematic inconsistency, but I think there's a bigger point to be made that Pierre's making, right? Which is, if you want to have long-term stability, longer-term economic growth, you want to attract new talent to Canada, and you want to have a spur on the economy that'll grow, that'll allow for tax revenues to be drawn in through economic growth, that'll allow us to have our social programs. You do it with consistent, long-term, broad-based tax relief, not boutique one-off stuff that lasts a few weeks and then goes away. And politically, for the government, it's kind of odd that you're going to have sort of a 2-month tax holiday, a $250 check, and then right as we're turning into the new year, heading towards the tariffs that may come in from the United States, we have to assume they will. Then they're going to reinstitute the GST and all these items. And then on April 1st, the carbon tax is going to go back up. And then right about then, you're going to have a federal budget and an election with all of these increased cost pressures. Probably not a great surfboard to surf on tax-wise going into an election campaign, but that's what the Liberals have set up for themselves, and they're going to have to wear it.
Well, I don't know if they're going to wear the shirts like you suggested, because I think it might violate the rules against props in the House of Commons. But if they buy them in a girl size 16 or lower or boy size 20 or lower, they'll get the tax off. All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank the Power Panel, James Moore, Andrew Thompson, Shachi Kurl, and Michelle Cadario.